We are back on Inside Politics talking about the impact of the coronavirus, particularly on our political system. Dr. Thomas Schwartz from Vanderbilt University is our guest. Dr. Schwartz, there's all these charges, even the president's made it, that this is all fake news. People look at the fact that in Tennessee and in other states, the numbers of people that are even sick, much less nobody's died at this point, they think this is just another Y2K kind of situation. Who's right about that at this point?
Well, I think we have to go with the medical experts that this is not a Y2K. This is a very serious issue. The question might be that in the end, we may be able to get our hands around it so that it does not lead to the sort of scale of fatalities that happened in Wuhan, for example. On the other hand, I think this is, as I see it, and from what I'm reading in the medical, among the medical experts, this is a very serious issue, and it could have very damaging effects.
Looking back in American history, about the only thing that comes close to this is what happened with the Spanish influenza pandemic that occurred back in 1918, close to the very end of World War I. There were social distancing techniques used in some areas. They worked very well. Those, when they're not used, it was very disastrous. We didn't have, I think that had a worldwide total of 50 million people that were killed. We didn't have near that many here, but as many as 400 probably died here in Nashville in the month of October of 1918. Are these, on the one hand, these things may help, but what's the tolerance for people to sort of cocoon and quarantine themselves? I mean, how long will people put up with that?
It's obviously going to be a real challenge in our society. People want to go to sporting events, they want to go to games, they want to, as I know from Vanderbilt, I mean, our students wanted to come to classes actually and things like that. Where I think we might be in slightly better state is because of the degree of technology that we have, that people can work from home, that people can actually have entertainment options available to them, multiple entertainment options. It may be a little easier for a short period of time, but I think some people will go sort of cabin crazy. There will be some of this, especially, so for example, parents with young children, this sort of thing that's going to happen.
The president has taken great pride in how the economy in general and the stock market in particular has done well. Is he going to have to change his message in his campaign in based of what's going on right now, just what we know already about the coronavirus?
I think it is going to be a real challenge for his campaign in the fall. And in fact, if I had to wager on it, my guess is that this is going to be one of the ugliest personal campaigns. It probably was going to be anyway. But I think one of the things that they will focus on is trying to paint Joe Biden, who I think is the likely Democratic nominee, as senile and out of touch and basically incompetent, and that's going to be the central message will be, yes, you might not like me, but look what your alternative is.
And nobody in this country is proposing, and they all, God forbid that we ever get to be anything like what's happened in China or what's been happening right now in the entire country of Italy. But the methods the government may have to use to combat this over the next couple of weeks, are we likely to see some of these things go into the courts, because personal liberties are going to definitely be abated or cut back on?
I think it's very definite that we're going to have some challenges, especially to some of the statewide bans on assemblies of more than a number of people. You could see some alternative churches, other groups sort of challenging that rule, especially if the epidemic doesn't seem to be taking its toll. I think there may be more direct challenges to some of the measures being taken.
So if the social distancing works, they'll actually be discredited, and people saying, well, see, it wasn't that bad in the first place.
That's the ironic, that may be one of the ironic results if it does work.
Also going on at the same time, there's this oil war between Russia and Saudi Arabia. That's happening somewhat separately from the virus issue, but we're likely to see gas prices go way down in the country over the next couple of weeks. That's both good and bad for the economy. People like lower gas prices, but we're an oil-producing country right now, energy-producing. That's where this could be bad.
Yes, it could damage particularly oil producers, and again, not to immediately go to the electoral results, but some of them are in key battleground states. You could have a downturn in those states where fracking, for example, Pennsylvania, other places where you could see a decline, and that would have an electoral impact.
So where do we go from here? Are we looking for basically life as we know it, daily life, to be totally changed?
I think we're looking at a temporary disruption, and then the question is, when we reassess it, what is temporary these days? I think probably a few weeks will be the test, and then to see where the epidemic is. But again, one of the challenges here is, of course, this issue of the testing to be able to see where particularly the virus is most acute.
Some additional primaries are coming up as a part of the selection process. Those states are scrambling to try to figure out how to keep those voting places and the whole process safe. Is this likely to extend on into what's going to happen with the conventions this summer? And if it goes long enough, even into the fall, oh, that's a long time from now.
It's still a long time. You know, my immediate concern, I have to tell you, is whether we're going to have graduation and any of those exercises.
You're in a weird situation, Evander. They sent all the students home at this point.
That's
going
right.
to go online.
We're going totally online next week, and so that is so. At least for the next 2 months or so, that's one of the bigger concerns. I think the conventions and other things, you know, there is this argument that the virus may be less intense over the summer and all of that. So I think you could see some degree of change. But obviously the conventions are an issue. This week's debate between Bernie Sanders
and been moved from Arizona
to Washington without an audience. I mean, that changes the dynamic greatly and certainly reduces the impact that Bernie Sanders might have.
So where else do we go with this? It appears this could go just about any different direction. And one of the problems in this is they say the markets don't like uncertainty. People don't like uncertainty, and we've probably got the most uncertainty we've ever had in the history of this country since maybe World War II when it first started, maybe certainly after 9/11.
Right. I think those are the comparisons. One thing we have to recognize, at least in part, if it is the case, is that China seems to be now having gotten through the worst. Now, they did take draconian measures, so with the comparison might not be fair, but at least it does seem there and in South Korea that we're beginning to see, to use a phrase that one has to be careful with a light at the end of the tunnel.
Dr. Summer Schwartz from Vanderbilt University is our guest. He's a political science and history professor there. We're talking about the coronavirus, its impact on politics, and its impact particularly for 2020 politics with the presidential election. Back to continue our conversation after you watch these messages.